What I want to talk about here is basically how I think about cultural capital is the same way that economic capital exists, which is, how like factories have machineries, or you have IP, intellectual property, or you have a proprietary methodology as a business in knowledge economy. The same way brands and people have cultural capital. This cultural capital can be taste or knowledge or access or information or membership or belonging or specific status and so on. So when brands and people trade that capital, they achieve a specific social currency. They achieve a specific social status and standing. And that's what makes cultural capital incredibly important in the current market, is because just based on commodities, on products, or just based on economics of the business, competition in the market looks such that you have to compete either on price, on distribution, on investment in growth. If you have cultural capital, you compete on scarcity, opacity, identity, and so on. So I really want to unpack how brands are now creating this cultural capital and how they exchange it, how they trade it in the market. You don't create a community just by creating an event. And the same short-term thinking remained, and the same way they're investing money in marketing gimmicks, say, at Coachella, we're going to create this gigantic activation. Or we're going to create a branded cafe, or we're going to create a pop-up. That is all Instagrammable. That also all creates content, but it does not create scarcity or opacity or belonging or any other form of long-term cultural capital. What you're building is just going to exist for a limited amount of time, is going to give you impressions. And what I say is always, impressions are fast food. They're empty calories. And just like fast food is not really food, having those marketing gimmicks, is not really culture. And when you think about how can you create scarcity, for example, what Charli XCX is doing on her B-sides, she went from creating a massive spectacle with her Bread album release 2 years ago into going very private, very invite only, very sort of secretive. So her account called B-sides on Instagram, her album is dropping on July 24th. Is private. So that is how do you create scarcity in distribution. Scarcity also can exist in product scarcity, which means what are the limited edition drops. You narrow down how many products you're going to create, how many of those that you're going to have, so everyone can wear the same brand, but not everyone has the same thing. Second is distribution scarcity, which is this example that I said that Charli XCX is doing, which is basically she's limiting who can see B-sides of her new album. And then you can also create brand scarcity, so product distribution, brand experience scarcity, when you limit your events and your membership to be invite only. So it's not mass, it's you focus on very specific demographics or groups of people or top of your pyramid or exclusive customers. So when we talk about opacity, it can again be communication opacity, which is a specific language or lexicon that exists around the brand. So back in the day when Starbucks was introduced to the United States, like late 70s, Americans didn't really drink espresso or cortado or any of those drinks. They were drinking Maxwell House and so on. So what Howard Schultz decided to do is to bring Milanese coffee culture into US. The way he did it is he introduced a specific, among other things, he introduced third space, but he also introduced a specific lexicon. So in order to order a Starbucks back in the day, you need to say venti or grande or tall. Like that's a unique lexicon for the brand. That's that opacity that's created. Those who don't know about Starbucks, I mean, now everyone knows about Starbucks, but back in the day, those who didn't know about Starbucks had no idea what a tall means. Second one is it can be product opacity. So that's when, for example, Margiela. Their branding is super discreet. Loro Piana branding, super discreet. Brunello's branding, super discreet. So that opacity works to separate connoisseurs from just regular consumers or novices. So those who are in the know, they're going to know that the sweater is Loro Piana or Brunello, or that certain cut is Margiela. That gives that product cultural capital. Then there is fandom. People can be a big fans of your specific product at a time, but that doesn't mean that you have a fandom. They can like Hailey Bieber Gap, drop. They may want to buy, they may not want to buy, they may like it, but that doesn't create a fandom. A24 has a crazy fandom. People go to see A24 movies regardless of who made it or what the movie is about. It's because they like A24 brand. That is a true fandom. And you gravitate towards a brand portfolio, and you would go and see any sort of product in that brand portfolio, regardless of what the genre is, because you have trust in the brand and you identify with the edginess of the brand, with this auteur sensibility, and so on. And then finally so there is scarcity, opacity, fandom, aesthetic innovation. There is identity. Identity is the fifth way of building cultural capital, and it can be rooted in a locale, which is what Erewhon has done really well. Erewhon has, I think, around 15 stores in California. They have a lot of stores around LA, but they have 0 stores anywhere else in the US. That's because it's deeply rooted in LA wellness culture and mentality. That is the brand identity, and that is the identity of its consumers. So knowing that creates the cultural capital that you literally, when you land in LA, the same way with In-N-Out Burger, you make pilgrimage to everyone to see who is there. Another way to build identity is around specific philosophy, specific taste, and so on. But that is also what makes you person as a person. That's the same thing what makes a brand. Having a strong identity that is linked to identity of its customers, to identity of a location, or identity of a lifestyle. The way that brands today are creating cultural capital is basically by tapping into their IP, by building worlds. That means that they're literally going from one category where they are specialists in. You have car companies creating fashion brands. So what we said here, there is like intersection of different, completely separate cultural domains. Before, they all operated independently and they had their specific marketing tactics for each. Now there is cross-pollination of that. So now, why is Ferrari having a fashion brand? So that is a great question. And that can't be answered until you take a step back and say, hey, Ferrari is actually a wide lifestyle brand. As a lifestyle brand, it identifies with a particular way of life. And if Ferrari drivers have a particular positioning and lifestyle and way of life, they are also going to have a specific taste in the clothes they're wearing. So on all of this is basically saying, if you expand your playing field to create your cultural capital, what you are really doing is you're capitalizing on the world you have built, you're capitalizing on your intellectual property, and then you're capitalizing on how well you understand the zeitgeist and how good of a culture brand fit you have. So if you don't have culture brand fit, it means your brand can be doing really well in the market, but it's off frequency in culture. The center of cultural gravity is, what are you using? What is your promise in culture that you are using to attract the audience, the collaborators, the creators, the observers? How are you attracting the culture to yourself? If a brand doesn't connect with culture, as I said before, it's going to lose in terms of business. It's going to left to compete on price, on positioning, on distribution, on investment in its market growth. So thinking about where does my brand can play what are the adjacent fields or not so adjacent fields that I also can extend my intellectual property? What is my center of cultural gravity? And then how do I use scarcity, opacity, identity, fandom, aesthetic innovation to accumulate that capital?